Good morning, Michael. Thank you for having me on.
So now I mentioned the gap between Muslims and non-Muslims. What exactly do you think is missing here?
I believe the most important element that's missing here is education. And when you have ignorance, that's where problems will be spawned. And when you educate people, this will create reason, brings about understanding, brings
Mhm.
about tolerance.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, though, the general rule being tolerance, and
Mhm.
that's something that you're going to be talking about on Monday night, I would suspect, as a way of
Yes.
educating people. But I wonder, this is coming from a place where you're trying to battle the misconceptions that people might
Yes.
have of Islam. What do you think some of the major misconceptions are right now?
Well, I can term them into three main categories. Number one is that Islam spread through violence and intolerance, and Islam did not tolerate minorities. Number two is that Islam did not contribute anything to the world. And number three, that Islamic law is vicious in itself. And all these three are main misconceptions, and they are all incorrect. If you look in the Funk and Wagnall Encyclopedia from 1952, under the section of Islam, it has a picture of this man who looks more like a Scotsman than anything else, and he has a big beard and a turban. He's holding a book in one hand and a sword in the other hand, and he has all these people running around this supposedly image of the Kaaba with swords. And then the caption underneath says, Muhammad, with the emblems of Islam, the sword and the Quran. And I can tell you right now that in the Arabic language, we have over 175 words for sword. Not a single one of these is mentioned in the Quran. But if you look in other books, for example, if you look in the Old Testament, the word sword is mentioned many times, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament as well.
So tell me something, Muhammad, though. Why do you think people believe Islam is violent right now?
I believe the reason people believe that is just like I mentioned, is because there is ignorance. People are unaware. And when people are unaware of the history of a people, especially due to the conflict that took place between, the Muslim empires and the powers of Europe with the Crusades, etc., that people were brainwashed to think that Islam is vicious and Islam is evil, especially since Christianity was the main religion at that time. And one of the ways that they tried to convince people to remain Christian was that Islam is a heathen religion and that Islam is intolerant, etc. And the reality of the fact was completely the opposite, that it was the European Christians who were the ones who were intolerant of their own Christian people.
But then again, I'm sorry, you see conflicts between Sunni versus Shia. You see what's going on in the Sudan. These are actual examples of tolerance and violence that's happening in the Muslim world. How do you address that and then say that, the faith is preaching peace?
And that's an excellent point you're bringing up, because if you look at the history of the religion for the past 1400 years, before modern times and before the influence of imperialistic powers and colonialist powers in the Muslim world, these problems between Sunnis and Shias were almost non-existent. So then you start to wonder if there's a hand stirring from outside, that somebody wants problems to occur, so that if there's something behind it. But in terms of as a religion inspiring that, of course, Islam does not tolerate intolerance and violence to anyone, whether it's Muslim sects themselves or anybody else.
Mohammed, it's interesting that you're looking at examples from the past to sort of show how Islam has been in the past. But how effective do you think these examples are going to be at changing people's perceptions of Islam right now?
See, the past is a great indication of what something is. If I want to speak about a certain subject, I want to say that I have a theory. For example, theory that I believe in tolerance and I believe tolerating others. Just to speaking words is very easy. And the Prophet spoke these words, but the point is, were these words applied in action? Christ said, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, everybody knows that, give them your left. Has that been applied as a general rule of Christianity in the past? And the answer is obviously no. Christian historians will tell you of the intolerance that took place among the sects, etc. But Islam showed that it was tolerant, and these are the proofs. The history is a proof of that. And the fact that today Fox TV mentioned that about 25% of the Muslims living in the United States today are all converts. So were these people converted through violence or for the sword, or was it through reason and through understanding?
So Clearly, then, if there is a lot of good within the Muslim world, and I certainly believe that is the case, there wouldn't be the need to build bridges like you're going to be doing on Monday night. In other words, people would buy into and believe the fact that we're all together, and yet this is exactly what you're doing. You're trying to build bridges to other cultures and other people. Why do you think it's important to do that now?
It's important to build bridges now. It has always been important to build bridges. From the first era of Islam, from the first days of the Prophet, he built bridges with the non-Muslim communities to ensure that there's understanding. The first thing our Prophet did when he entered the city of Medina was to hold a council with the Jews and the pagans of the city, to sit down and talk and discuss what is the common good of the city and how to establish the society as a whole, how people will be able to interact. Everybody has their own religion, everybody has their own way of dealing with each other, and to deal in a proper way. When the Prophet was in Mecca, and his reaction to the pagans, his reaction was very clear, that you have your own religion and I have my own religion. You don't worship my God, I don't worship your God. At the end of the day, as human beings, we should interact with respect and with love and without being aggressive to each other.
And yet we're seeing something very different today. So tell me, Mohamad, is it important to build bridges to people who are non-Muslims, or is it even more important to build bridges within the faith itself? So those who are demonstrating intolerance within the Muslim faith right now, how aware are they of the peaceful ways of the faith?
Indeed, as you mentioned, it's extremely important not just to build bridges outside the Muslim community, but within as well. It's important to educate those who are intolerant among the Muslims. And there's no doubt there are intolerant people among the Muslim community and in the Muslims at large. There are people who are intolerant, as there are in every single religion. There are extremists, and there are people who misread quotations and have basically their own the ideologies which are not conferring with the ideology of Islam.
On Monday night, you're going to be sharing a lot of these stories with people and going into full detail, I suspect. What's one message or impression that you would like your audience to walk away with at the end of Monday night?
I guess if you put it in a nutshell, is that Islam is about peace, and Islam promotes peace and love between humans. That we believe that we were created from Adam, and that all humans come from a single source, that we should have this love and respect and tolerance and understanding amongst each other.
That's a very good message, Mohamad. I certainly hope that's the case on Monday night.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on.
A pleasure.